Welcome to a new podcast by Chadwick Lawrence, The Legal Alternative. It's the podcast formerly named the Monday Morning Dispatch. Nils, we're back.
We are delighted to be back this sunny day in Leeds.
Yeah, back with the podcast. So we're going to do something slightly differently to previously. The podcast called The Legal Alternative, and what we're trying to do is give our listeners the updates in the law, in employment law and regulatory, but delivered in a slightly different fashion to really give you the highlights, what you need to know, what you don't need to know, where things have been misreported, and give you the Chadwick Lawrence alternative version to the law. Nils, what we got coming up today?
Yep, so a new format. So we're going to be discussing what's in our very busy inboxes. And then we're going to move on to some out of work chat, some out of office things that we'd like to discuss. And finally, some questions from socials on LinkedIn.
So Nils, what's in the inbox at the moment? As you say, very busy inbox, but what's in the inbox?
It is, and it's quite a niche area that I'd like to discuss this morning, which is music licenses. So our colleague Nick Worsnop in the corporate team slightly treading on his toes here because he deals with intellectual property rights. So this would actually be Nick's bag really, but it's been coming into our both mine and Nick's inbox over the last few years actually, where businesses are being stung because they don't have a music license, and it's actually in fairly again mundane sets of circumstances. So I've just come downstairs from the dock to film this podcast, and the radio was on. Chadwick Lawrence is required to have a music license because of the fact that we play the radio in the workplace. There's some businesses though where it's much more fundamental to that person's business. The obvious one that springs to mind for me, where people are getting caught out more and more, is actually gyms where music is being played either over the general area of the gym where people are working out, or a class that is themed around music. So as I'm sure you can tell, I'm a regular member of the gym. It might be you're doing a spin class, you're doing a body pump, whatever, which heavily relies on music for the pace of that class. If you don't have a music license, you may well be actually breaching the law. The way not to land yourself in hot water is to either avoid copyright infringement, or the more common method would be to get a music license. And the music license that you can get, and I'll just read directly from their website, is PPL and PRS for music, which can license in the UK on behalf of their members and affiliated international societies. And this license covers the vast majority of commercially released music available from around the world. If you don't have a license and you're not aware of this, the first that you may be made aware is when you receive a letter. And quite often that's actually quite threatening. So recently I've heard of an individual who runs a gym. He's received a set of pleadings and a letter before action saying, "We're going to take you to the High Court in London." Immediately quite scared by that, because it not only has the potential to get very expensive in terms of litigation, but this is a gentleman who's now thinking, my gym business is based around music, and I may now have my business in hot water. So if you're either a business where it's an incidental part of what you do, like at Chadwick Lawrence, or if it's a more fundamental part of your business, it's really important.
When we talked about this off air before, Nils, it surprised me, to be honest. I was vaguely aware of licenses, but from a kind of hospitality, bars, clubs element, and I think I was aware they would have to have a license, but it's the thing that surprised me was the incidental radio in the office, which you wouldn't think of to do, because obviously people at home put the radio on all the time, but it's, you say, in a business premises, completely took me by surprise. So I imagine it's same for our clients, and just something to be aware of. The cost's not great, but it's, as you say, the cost of not having it is huge.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a lot of businesses where it creates the atmosphere. You know, you may own a coffee shop. Any sort of leisure real industry tends to have music in the background, doesn't it?
Yeah. Interesting. So again, as always, any questions about licenses, fire Nils an email. In terms of my inbox, probably not surprising, and listeners of the old podcast, probably not surprised that I'm still dealing with the Employment Rights Act and the Employment Rights Bill. Updates came out a week ago, and still getting lots of requests in the inbox, and there's been lots of things posted in the press, some quite negative. Obviously we are in the world that we're going to have the changes in national insurance coming in, and I saw a lot of reporting on these changes as yet another blow to business. And as I said at the intro, what we're trying to do today is not be political, not to take sides, but actually to try and break down what actually has been announced, the changes, and what is that impact and how big it's going to be. And I think this is a classic case of something that is being reported actually in very inflammatory headline terms. And when you look at the detail, I don't think it's that impactful. So I was just going to quickly go through. There's 4 real changes that have been announced. We've got nothing in terms of time frame. We've got nothing in terms of when it will actually come in and go through the legislative instruments, but they've been announced. The other thing I'll mention at the end is there's lots that we've previously talked about in previous podcasts, which is kind of now been ignored or not mentioned at all. So I'll talk briefly through that. So the main changes, I think the first one which got the most attention was the changes to statutory sick pay. As a blow to business. What we're dealing with here, actually, I think is quite a small technical change. At the moment, the current legislation, as you'll probably remember, with statutory sick pay is, in order to qualify for statutory sick pay, you have to earn over what we call the lower earnings limit. It's about 123 quid a week. So it's fairly low in terms of the amount. What the new legislation is seeking to do is remove that lower earnings limit, which means that everyone really should qualify for some form of SSP. When you do, they're still going to have this limit around to stipulate really what people are paid. And if you were historically under that limit, what would happen now is that you will receive 80% of your salary. So that's been removed. Where I personally think the impact of this is going to be relatively minimal is how low that lower earnings limit is. In reality, where the national minimum wage is now, unless you are a real part-time, short hours worker, you'd have been over the lower earnings limit anyway, and you'd qualify for SSP. So I completely understand the reason to do it. I completely understand the kind of political win in doing it, in terms of saying, the lowest paid, the most vulnerable people qualify. This being a massive blow to business, I think, is slightly overstated. Similarly, probably with the other few updates, there's been a lot in the press about fire and rehire, and can we outlaw this? We've got nothing in that in terms of detail. What we have is an increase in what we would technically call the protective award. So in a redundancy consultation or a re-engagement scenario, there is an award if we fail to consult properly. The moment it's a 90-day award, what the change is to extend that to 180 days. So it's not trying to make fire and rehire, termination and re-engagement unlawful. It's saying, which if you do it unfairly already is, it's a question of if you don't consult, if you don't do it fairly, then this protective award will be increased. So it's a deterrent, ultimately. In terms of being a blow to business, well, the discussion with business is we shouldn't have been doing it anyway, and there was already a 90-day award. So all it's done is kind of ratchet up the penalty. Final 2 things, again, some impact. Obviously, if you recognise a union, I think there's been lots of reports about enhancing trade union rights. 2 technical changes about strike notice. So the requirement to give notice, previously 14 days, has been reduced to 10, and the maximum period you can strike for, currently 6 months, is being increased to 12. So where I say this, obviously minimal impact, I absolutely understand if you recognise a trade union and there may be industrial action, that is a large impact. The 6 months to a year out, I think it is. So yeah, an impact there. Final one to talk about, parental bereavement leave has been previously announced. It's more of a re-announcement. This now will come into place for any parent suffering a bereavement, entitlement to 2 weeks leave. It's unpaid leave. So again, I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs of paying someone who suffered a parental bereavement as 2 parents here, but the requirement is 2 weeks leave. So again, I don't think it's going to be, touch wood, won't be something that will get used a lot. Final thing for me, Nils, is what's not been mentioned. We've talked a lot about day one employment rights. So removing the cap on unfair dismissal claims, nothing on that, nothing on probationary periods, 9 months, nothing about banning fire and rehire. So some of these really big changes, they've not been eliminated. They're not saying they're not happening. There's just no detail. So again, I think in terms of planning your workforce, planning business, it's just more wait and see. But I think important for our clients, I think the message from Chadwick Lawrence is, you need to be aware of these changes, but don't particularly panic at this stage. Don't know any views from you, Nils?
Just 2 things, really. One, and this is not getting to political, fact that those are easier to announce than implement.
Absolutely.
So I suspect they're going to probably take some time out there to work through. The other thing is, when I did just exclusively employment law, looked at many hundreds of contracts regarding that lower earnings threshold, and never once thought, why is that in place?
Yeah.
So that's obviously a change. But yeah, yeah, I think that's just going to be the continuing drip of information, and then hopefully some solid news at some point, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. If I was to put my crystal ball gazing, I think nothing before October next year. I'd be surprised,
Yep.
and if not, even maybe April next year in terms of when this will come in. Moving on to out the office, Nils.
Yeah. So just to pass on my congratulations to all our sporting clients. I think pretty much without exception, everyone had a decent or very good start to the season.
Yeah.
So congratulations to Bradford Bulls on their performance in the Challenge Cup last week. A really good performance against Salford in the Challenge Cup. Wakefield taking to Super League like a duck to water, following their year in the Championship.
Yeah.
Barnsley, Huddersfield Town continuing to do well, and then we're going to Leeds Rugby.
We are. So we're out the office together, Nils, which is even more exciting. So the time that this recording will come out, I think will have been again. Fingers crossed for Leeds against Wigan on Saturday. I mean, a tough game, but fingers crossed. So yeah, out the office together. Another thing I'm doing, Nils, out the office for any listeners, it's the event's still happening. 27th of March in our Wakefield office. We're doing conducting a disciplinary hearing, a real deep dive into a subject that I think a lot of people are aware of disciplinary hearings, but I get a lot of feedback that says, well, actually, how do I do this in practice? What's the actual skills you need? So we'll touch a bit on the law, but really what we're going to discuss based on a case is actually practically what do you do? How do we do that investigation? How do we do the hearing? So as much talking about the skills required of a chair, of a disciplinary chair, an appeal officer of that investigation, and what we do rather than just the law. So more of a practical seminar. The team have been doing their best. We've got a little scenario, so they've been doing their best. It's on sexual harassment, so we've got the team have been working away, building up a pack. So anyone who wants to come, details on the socials, or again, drop me or Nils an email. We've got a specific email, seminars@chadlaw.co.uk for anything there. Finally, Nils, section.
Questions.
With it being episode 1, I've asked the team, and going forward, I think it will be in the details in the description of the seminar, but please do ask some questions. There's some social posts coming out asking for all things legal questions, related questions about us, anything you've got. But the question I've had from the office, which is a really interesting one that I thought we'd share, is a question, and it's based on something that's happening in one of the big banks that I won't name, but we'll discuss, which is, the question is, we want to incentivize employees to get back to the office. Can we use office attendance as a factor in deciding bonuses? And a really interesting question, and something that, again, is very topical, very heated opinion in terms of attendance in the office. So a question of, rather than mandating people, rather than saying you must come in the office, is there a way to incentivize? And I think, can be a lauded, applaudable thing to do, but I think both of us, the alarm bells start to ring. And there's a lot you should share in a minute, but for me, the alarm bells ring over discrimination issues, looking at potential indirect discrimination, where it might be an admirable thing that we're wanting to reward attendance, but actually, how is this impacting on your working mothers? How's it impacting on potential carers, people with disabilities? And that's the real alarm bells for me. I don't know your views.
But you could just take your pick of any protected characteristic, and this could cause problems. It could be age, sex. Someone who is transitioning, for example, may not wish to quite rightly come in the office and would be potential reason. It surprises me that this method was being used to encourage people to get back to the office.
Yeah, and again, I would say I won't name them, but this has come from one of the large national banks trialing this, and in part of a discretionary bonus. They'll argue that it's part of, they've got a legitimate aim, which is getting people back into the office, and this is a way to incentivize. And I suppose I don't think a great legal argument, I think the moral argument is, well, surely this is better than forcing people. So rather than saying contractually, we're getting you in, we're going to do a fire and rehire type scenario, we're going to make redundancies unless you come in. This is surely a more incentive should be better than the stick. I think sadly the legal argument is, I get that, but as we both, it was just immediate red flags in all of those areas. So I think the message for any clients listening who are thinking about such a policy, tread incredibly carefully. I think that's it for me this week. So thank you for your questions, and look forward to the podcast next week. Nils, any thoughts?
Just great to be back. Sunny day in Leeds. Looking forward to the Rhinos on Saturday. What could be better?
Perfect. Thanks, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.